When looking at a child's regulation, there are many individual differences that fit into this generalized and broader category of regulation. One of the areas that is most frequently talked about is something called sensory modulation. While sensory modulation and sensory integration are hot topics these days, and many children struggle with sensory regulatory or sensory integration challenges, it's important to note that sensory regulation, sensory integration is really not a comprehensive enough description as what many children are struggling with. And yes, while many children do have sensory differences, the sensory and the emotional systems are always intertwined. Actually, Jean Ayres, the mother of sensory integration, said in some of her original writings that it was the emotional system that mediates the sensory system. Our emotional development and our emotional system control the sensory development in the sensory system and sensory integration. So as a result, there's very rarely pure sensory integration or pure sensory regulatory issues. There's always combinations of challenges that can have elements of sensory challenges, but also emotional regulatory difficulties. That is why when a child is revving up, becoming more impulsive and hyperactive, they're also more likely then to get frustrated, angry, or aggressive. When you try to describe a child's sensory challenges, try to do it without interjecting different emotional terms like frustration or anger or meltdowns. It can't be done. So when we talk about sensory regulation, let's define it as our ability to take in and respond to the physical world in a proportionate and consistent manner. Meaning if we hear a sound other than a fire alarm, it's someone tapping their foot or chewing gum, we don't scream or cover our ears. However, if we do hear the fire alarm, we should stand up quickly and act alert and follow the instructions. But think very quickly about your own experiences with alarms. What's your first instinct when you hear an alarm go off? Well, gee, you think, am I safe? Should I be worried? Do I need to hurry out of here? Or is this a drill? Any of those thoughts also are connected to our emotional system, so you can see very clearly how a physical experience has a tie to our emotional experiences. It's important to note that children with sensory regulatory challenges can be underreactive, where they might seek out more sensation. They can be underreactive, where they are more passive, withdrawn, and lethargic, and seemingly disinterested. Or they can be overreactive, where they tend to have more strong and extreme responses to different stimulus. It's important that we, as the adults in a child's life, their caregivers, their therapists, their educators, understand what types of physical stimulus a child might need, as well as what types of physical stimulus should be absent from the environment. Part of doing floor time well and creating a hospitable environment for any child is limiting some of the stimulus, as well as making sure we're providing stimulus. When I see videos of people doing floor time in busy offices, we often see too much clutter, too many small toys, puzzles, figurines, cars, and all it does is encourage children to move from one object to the next object because they're not able to modulate some of the information around them. It can create more hyperactivity, it can create more sensitivity and distractibility. For all children, we need to help them develop a state of equilibrium, balance, calm, composed states where children are feeling like they're getting enough stimulus and avoiding stimulus that is more aggravating or overstimulating. It's also important to note that in the very same system a child might require stimulus like movement, pressure, or touch, that a child can also get too much. They can be both underreactive and overreactive in the same area, which makes this even more challenging to address at times and sometimes even confusing to think about. But think about a child who's moving a lot or needs to move. This child may need to swing or bounce or run around or spin in circles, but the more they do it, the more likely we are to pass over this point of balance and equilibrium and go from an understimulated state to an overstimulated state. And now the child is becoming more revved up, and they're unfortunately not learning to balance out the experience. It's important we help children learn to balance this out by making sure these interactive sensory experiences are done in a more modulated manner. We're going fast and then slow, and then high and then low, and then hard and then soft. And by breaking this up into segments where a child is experiencing a pattern of different intensities and speeds, then they actually learn to modulate not just off of the physical experience, but also off of the human interaction that is being provided during it.